There we are. Okay, very good. So again, excuse me, chapter six, on page 81. And so here we have, um, we've already talked about being salt, being light. We have some of these positive attributes now after kind of the very difficult discussion of and uh, ironic, contradictory, maybe even discussion of how the disciples were blessed. Now we have this kind of turn to some positivity, salt and light, and the city on the hill that can't be hid. Um, and Bonhoeffer says something that might seem a little bit contradictory, or maybe not exactly comfortable um, for us who have, might be given to doing things behind the scenes or not really wanting people to know what we're doing. Um, Bonhoeffer is saying that as Jesus is claiming that we're, not to have light, but we're actually light, that we're not to be like a city, but we are actually the city. We are on the hill. We are the salt. Um, that we are to be very public in what we do. We're not to hide. Um, at the bottom of 81, he says to flee into invisibility is to deny the call. Um, and again, as I have said and will continue to say, in the context that Bonhoeffer is writing, there he feels, and there are others obviously in the society that feel the same way, that the proclamation of the gospel needs to be very public, very out in the open, very forceful to push back against the evil of the regime, to push back against what is happening in the name of the German people through the Third Reich. And so, as the government is very public, the government is very forthright, very forceful with its message. So the church must be as well. So again, for Bonhoeffer, he's reading all of this through this lens, and he's saying if you're going to answer the call to Christ, to follow Christ, you must be visible. You must be out in the streets, as it were. You must be very public with your proclamation of the gospel. Because again, in Bonhoeffer's mind, to try to retreat into behind the scenes, to try to retreat into invisibility is to not truly follow Jesus, and ultimately is to deny the call. Because as Jesus goes on to say, the bushel basket, uh, under which a visible community can hide its light. This is Bonhoeffer saying, can be, the bushel basket can be fear. That we don't want to say anything because we don't want to be lumped with that group or pushed out of our normal peer group or even family group by being too public with our faith. Um, but that fear can be fear of human beings uh, just as much as it can be intentional conformity with the world for some arbitrary purposes. So there are many things that might stop us from being as vocal or as public with our faith as is required, especially in times of challenge and of darkness and of evil. You know. And so Bonhoeffer, flipping over to 82, really wants the those that are reading, those he is teaching, to know that it is a very public faith that they're training for. it's a very public expression of following Jesus that they are moving into. And again, that's going to be the only thing that is going to be effective to combat what is happening in society. Um, and but again, um, for Bonhoeffer, it's this letting your light shine before Gentiles. It is the light of Jesus's call, which is shining. So it's not us. It's not our ability to to be particularly forthright or forceful or powerful in the proclamation or shine with our own light brightly into the darkness. It's the call of Jesus that allows us or enables us to shine. And as we see in other places in Scripture, that really kind of takes the burden off of us. As Jesus tells the disciples before he leaves, you'll be dragged before kings and rulers, but you don't have to worry about what you will say because the Spirit will give you words to say in that moment that they won't be able to refute. There's a deep sense of trust in God that is necessary to be a kind of forthright and courageous uh, proclaimer of the gospel. We've seen it throughout history, obviously starting with Jesus and then passed on to the disciples, and then in various eras of the world of world history. You can think of Joan of Arc, you could think Thomas Becket, you could think of Martin Luther King Jr., of Medgar Evers, of others that have stood and claimed the mantle of Jesus, following him very boldly into the world, proclaiming, "Thus saith the Lord," in a way that caused at the very least, for the power structure to take notice and for people to wonder, okay, what is this really about? Are we doing the right thing by these decisions, these actions, as a government or as a people or as a church even, that proclaims to follow Jesus, or at least purports to follow Jesus? And we know in a lot of those instances that the power structure is not too accommodating of that, and typically there is some backlash. Sometimes people are assassinated, murdered, killed. Others there's torture. Others imprisonment. Blackballing, false accusations. All of these things can happen when we stand up and stand against the powers that be, as it were. But Bonhoeffer saying is we're answering the call, then we might be called on to do that. It's not a foregone conclusion that that will be what we must do, because again, we're following what Jesus needs of us, and there are we have to be willing to be the one that stands, in the midst of the public square. Have to be the one that speaks truth to power, but our role might be different. But it again is based on what God wants, not our comfort or discomfort with, or our desire to do particular things that we're, either more comfortable with or feel we're more prepared for. It's, to follow closely enough to Jesus, and trust Jesus enough to then do the thing that we are supposed to do in the time, according to God's will that it needs to be done. Um, and so,
Can I ask a silly
yes.
question?
Hmm.
How do you know that you're the light?
How do you know?
Hmm.
I don't. Well,
They
I'm
say the
not.
light is not something given to you as, for example, you're preaching,
Hmm.
but you yourself are it.
Hmm. Right. Well, I think to a certain extent, some of the confirmation that you're the light comes from, it's kind of maybe at least twofold. One is, your connection with God. So in your prayer, in your meditation, in your however you cultivate your relationship with God, you have a sense of peace as you move forward to do whatever it is that you feel led to do. And then there's also another confirmation that comes from people around you. Not everybody, because obviously you're gonna have opponents. You're gonna have people that don't like what you're doing or saying or how you do it or say it. Um, but there are we do see those people that whose lives are made better. Their load is lightened. Their darkness is dispelled a bit. They realize in what you and I are doing that they do have worth and are worthy of love and protection and safety and all those things. And so I think,
So it's
I
based on
think,
your
yeah.
basic assumption of yourself,
Hmm.
your basic assumption of yourself being the light.
Is it your assumption or is it more that you're trying to do or to emulate Jesus? And in that, hopefully your light is shining. But again, in Bonhoeffer and in others that have written, it's not so much us
Mm.
per se as individuals that are shining, quote unquote, but it's Christ shining through us. Kind of that image of the window, stained glass window, that the light is behind us, shining through us into the world, and it takes on some of our particularities, but it really still the source of the light is Christ.
Mm.
So any and everyone could assume, and you know what assume means.
Yeah, I mean, I
It
assume.
it's based on you yourself.
Well, no, not totally. I mean,
Mm.
because there are outward and visible signs of
Mm.
of the positive effect that you have. Um, and that's not your assumption. That's what, that's kind of data coming back to you as you see the reaction or the effect that you are able to have when you're doing the things that, that you're led to do in following Jesus.
Mm.
But it's a tricky game. It's not straightforward. And we probably have known quite a few people that claim to be shining the light. And whether we find out or not at some point in time that it was self-serving, that it wasn't really based on integrity or truth. It was based on, oh, well, if I do these things, then I'll curry the favor of certain people, and people will then, so we
Mm.
have all of that mixed into all of this. It's not clear cut. If it were, it would be a lot easier and a lot more people would do it. But it's a tricky proposition for sure. But, at the bottom of 82, Bonhoeffer talks about this a little bit when he said the good works of the disciples should be seen in this light. So the last part of the paragraph above, in which Jesus talks about, it is the light of Jesus' call, which is shining. You know, that, what sort of light should come from that place to which only disciples have claim. What do the invisibility and hiddenness of Jesus' cross, under which the disciples stand, have in common with the light which is to shine? Shouldn't it follow from the hiddenness of the cross that the disciples should likewise be hidden and not stand in the light? It is an evil sophistry which uses the cross of Jesus to derive from it the church's call to confirmation to the world. Does not a simple listener recognize quite clearly that precisely at the cross something extraordinary has become visible, or is it that all, or is that all nothing but Justitia Civilis? So is the cross confirmation to the world? To the shock of everyone else, is the cross not something which has been come outrageously visible in the complete darkness? It is not visible through. It is not visible enough that Christ is rejected and must suffer. that his life ends outside the city gates on the hill of shame. Is that invisibility? And then goes on to say that the works that we do are visible, but your good works should be seen, says Jesus. Not you, but your good works. And so again, there's the piece of, that when we're doing what we do for the sake of Christ, that it's not that we're not um, particularly concerned about what people say about us while we're doing it, good or bad, positive or negative. Accolades. Oh, you're such a wonderful, selfless person that's always, serving people. Or, on the flip side, oh, you're just a mean and not nice person or whatever, or you're only doing this to gain favor, whatever whatever the positives and negatives could be. That is not. It's not that it's not of issue, but that's not our goal. To either curry favor or make sure that people aren't thinking badly of us. It's simply following Christ. And when our works are seen, and it's not grandstanding, it's not, doing works just for the sake of being out in public, but as we live our lives, we have to do that. It's just, because this is so important because we're following Christ as closely as we can because we've answered this call, and part of our call is to be, public witnesses, and we're out there doing things that speak of the gospel, people are going to see them. And again, whether they say it's a great thing or whether they say it's a horrible thing, whether we say we're great people or horrible people, that ultimately, um, in the grand scheme and the final summation doesn't matter. That it's because we're doing what God has asked us to do. And some would say, that we're doing all of this so that when we're before Jesus at the great judgment, when we're at the pearly gates, when we all get to heaven, as the hymn says, then we'll hear, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter into the kingdom that has been prepared for you." So it's always looking beyond to that point of Jesus being pleased, of God being pleased, and when that's the goal, then the effect that we have, again, whether people report it as positive or as negative, ultimately is not really part of our calculus. Does it hurt when people, accuse us of doing good things uh, for bad or evil or self-serving purposes? Sure, it does. Does it feel good when people say, "Oh, this is great. You've done such a wonderful job. Oh, you must be an asset to, your family, or, God must be really happy with you." Yeah, okay, great. But again, it's not me, but Christ in me. It's not about your assessment of me, either good or ill, but it's about, okay, I'm doing the best thing that I can to follow what I, to the best of my ability, think that God has called me to do, and why God has me here in this point in time, in this era of history, in this particular community. All of these various things, God has me here for a reason, and so I'm going to do what I need to do. And so the light shining, the effect that we have, again, what people report, positive and negative, ultimately is not really the case, um, but that we are consistent in doing whatever it is that we're called to do. Nowhere, as Bonhoeffer says it, on 83, nowhere does it say that God becomes visible, but that good works will be seen, and that the people will praise God for these works. Um, the cross becomes visible, and the works of the cross become visible. The want and renunciation of the blessed become visible. But human beings can never be praised for the cross and for such a faith community. Only God can be praised. Um, and so we're always you know, you know, but for the grace of God go I. We're always, um, pushing whatever it is toward God, because ultimately the praise is going to God, even if people want to praise us. And so that our visible witness is to point people toward God, which is exactly what Jesus did. Jesus was pointing people to God. Jesus was, yes, he's Son of God. Yes, the Messiah, the chosen, the anointed one, all of those things. But all of the things that he did, all of the work, all the power that he showed, all of the teaching that he did, was pointing toward and through himself to God. And so, as Jesus was doing that, so that's what we're doing. Whatever we are doing, our goal is that God gets the glory. We're pointing through ourselves, pointing beyond ourselves to the God that gives us the ability to do the things. And when we can be consistent with that, people will roll their eyes and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, here you go again," or people won't believe us because they'll say, "Oh yeah, yeah, you have to say that because that's what a Christian does. They say that, but you really don't believe it." All of the things that people might say. Ultimately, we have to be consistent with passing along or of getting the focus from us or what we have done or what people are giving us credit for doing and point it toward God, point it toward the one that deserves the praise, but the one that is the reason and the source for the good works that we've done, for the things that we've done. And so that also kind of helps us to stay balanced. And yes, to claim the reality that we are light, but not to hold that too closely, as if it's a reward or some kind of marker of our goodness and our righteousness, but that it's God, that it's Jesus, and the only reason we're able to shine, the only reason we're able to do the things that we've done that do help in the world, that do shine light, that are salt, that are the city on the hill, is because of the love and the grace and the power of God. And the only thing that we can claim in that is that we said yes, um, that we said yes, and we put aside the things that would potentially be in the way, because we want to follow Christ. We want to be with Christ as close as him as we can be. We want to follow him as closely as we can. We want to look like him. We want people to recognize Jesus in us and through us, so that really when they see what they see in us, ultimately they're seeing Christ and they're seeing the light of God. They're being seasoned with the salt of the earth. They're hearing in what we say and we do the call that God has on everybody's life, to come closer, to know how beloved you are, and that you too have a part to play. That you're not just here by happenstance. That you didn't make it to whatever point that you are in life, just because. But there's a reason, and there's a role that you play, that all of us play in carrying out the will of God, and in the salvation story that began, so many thousands of years ago, that has come to us now. Our Now we have a part to play, to continue that story, to share that light, and to be that salt. All right. All right. So that kind of brings us to the end of that section, about the middle of page 83, the section on the visible church community. So now we'll move on to the righteousness of Christ. Um, this section is interesting. It's Bonhoeffer's doing a lot of work to make this fit. So we'll see what you all think about it as we go through it. Um, so the righteousness of Christ. Now he's now in Matthew 5, the 17th through the 20th verses. Do you not think that I have come to excuse me, do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay. So there are some things in here that are interesting. I mean, we've heard them probably time and time again, but nonetheless, they're interesting. Oh, so wait a minute. I thought that the Pharisees were bad, that you were at odds with the Pharisees, Jesus, that we shouldn't do what the Pharisees do. But Jesus here says that unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Um, and so there's a lot, you know, in these verses, but so we'll kind of go through go through them, go through the points of the verses and on our first kind of struggle. Yes,
There's the word there, exceed.
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 Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes. It is very, very interesting. And interestingly enough, too, Bonhoeffer doesn't really deal with that in this as he kind of goes through it. He touches on it, but he really kind of leaves that alone. Now, granted, as we kind of go through his logic and explanation here, you can see where he might not really need to focus on that. But yeah, that's a very interesting piece. Any more thoughts about that, Ms. Curtis? About the exceeds?
Because the way we were raised and the one all of our readings, Paul's and whomever, the
Hmm.
Pharisees is the worst of the worst.
Hmm.
And when
Yeah.
we speak about exceeding their
Hmm.
behavior, there's more to go that we can get away with.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, it's very,
Okay.
very interesting. I mean, this part of the Sermon on the Mount is, I mean, there are many parts that have been problematic for people, but this, I mean, and you can imagine, that the disciples and the people that are listening are like, wait a minute, what? Exceed the righteous scribes and Pharisees? What do you mean? Um, but he goes into a little bit of that. But thank you for uh, for pointing that out because it is a very fascinating point of this little piece of the Sermon on the Mount. Um, And so Bonhoeffer jumps right in there. It is not surprising that the disciples supposed that the end of the law was coming with such promises they received from their Lord, in which everything was devalued, which had value in the eyes of the people, and everything that was called blessed, which had no value. They were indeed addressed and set apart as people to whom simply everything had been given by God's free grace, and as the certain heirs of the kingdom of heaven, as those who now possessed everything. They had the full and personal communion of Christ with Christ, who made everything new. They were the salt, the light, the city on the hill. Thus, everything old had passed away and been replaced. It was too easy to assume that Jesus would draw a line of final separation between himself and what went before, that he would declare the law of the old covenant to be repealed and declare his independence from it in his freedom as the Son, and that he would abolish it for his community. After everything that had been said before, the disciples could easily think like Marcion. Now, we've probably come across Marcion, at least in some of the Bible studies we've had in the church history. Anybody remember who Marcion was? So, so Marcion was an early church, early disciple of Christ, that believed that the Old Testament was no good and should not be read by Christian communities. He thought it should all be thrown out because Jesus has come and Jesus has done away. The new covenant is here. The old one is of no use. And so he recommended that the Bible, the scriptures that Christian communities read, would not have any of the Old Testament, any of the Hebrew scriptures. Um, he got excommunicated for that, of course, because the Orthodox party, as it were, held sway and then decided which various books of the Bible would be in. Primarily, taking because the canon, the Hebrew scriptures had been settled for a number of centuries by the time Jesus came along, and so so then when you get into the early church councils. And the debates about the personhood of Jesus, the divinity of Jesus, how the Holy Spirit, the nature of God, all of these things that were being debated early on, in about the second through the fourth centuries or so. Part of it was, well, what are we going to say as the assembled leadership of the church uh, are the correct information to read about Jesus and about the early church. And so there was debate over a number of years, hundreds of years actually, about, which gospels were included, what other writings, the Pauline letters, all of these things. It was a work in progress. So anyway, Marcion was in kind of the beginning of that. And he read the Old Testament and he was like, no, the God of the Old Testament is an evil, vengeful God that doesn't look anything like Jesus. So we're not even going to deal with that. Christians should not even read that anymore. We shouldn't have anything to do with that. It's just the Christian scriptures, New Testament, so called. And so Bonhoeffer invokes Marcion here to say that, yeah, that would make sense, right? Jesus is now going to come and declare that all the old, tradition of the Pharisees, the old covenant, doesn't hold anymore. Um, but um, Jesus comes to say, "Do you think that I came to fulfill the law and the prophets? I came to abolish them, not to fulfill them." This would be kind of what people would say, would think that he would say. Well, of course I came to abolish them. This doesn't make any sense. I'm coming to revise everything and give you a new understanding of God. Um, and but Jesus says, do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. And so the old covenant, so-called, the covenant between God and Abraham and renewed in the Mosaic covenant, and all of the ways that God has been showed God's self to the people of Israel and made these covenants with them. Uh, that's still in force, Jesus is saying. Um, and so Bonhoeffer goes on in this last full paragraph on the last paragraph on 84 to say, how are we to understand that? We know the disciples are addressed. They are bound to Jesus Christ alone. No law was allowed to hinder communion between Jesus and his disciples. That became clear in commentary on Luke 9 and 57 and following. So discipleship is allegiance to Jesus Christ alone and is unmediated. Nevertheless, now an entirely unexpected step follows. The disciples are bound to the Old Testament law. In doing so, Jesus says two things to his disciples. Allegiance to the law by itself is not yet discipleship. Being a good observant Jew and being like the scribes and the Pharisees and adhering to all of the tenets of the law is not yet discipleship, nor may allegiance to this person of Jesus Christ without the law be called discipleship. So it's both and, because as Bonhoeffer goes on to say, and we'll talk about it more specifically in a minute, Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. Jesus is not the destroyer of the law, is not the reformer of the law. Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. So we can't, as Christians, as followers, as disciples, say, oh, we don't have time for that Old Testament stuff. We don't have time for the covenant. We don't have time for any of that. That's foolishness. We're going to follow Jesus in the new covenant. Jesus says, I came to fulfill it. So then, as Bonhoeffer is saying here, if we're following Jesus, Jesus has now said that the law, the covenant, the old covenant is in full effect. Then, by virtue of following Jesus, we are bound to the law as well. Okay, so um, so the law, um, Bonhoeffer is saying, is the law of the old covenant. It's not a new law, but it's the one old law, to which the rich young man, remember earlier, Jesus has, um, that rich young man came and asked, well, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus asked him one of the commandments. And he says, he goes down the list of the commandments. He said, yes. And the young man says, I've followed them all my life. I've always followed these commandments. I've done things that the commandments tell me to do. Um, and so then Jesus looks at him and in different versions says, and loved him, and said, well, one thing you lack, sell all your possessions, give them to the poor, and then come follow me. And that was a bridge too far. This rich young man couldn't do that. But Jesus asked him, well, what about the law? Have you followed the law? Because if you followed the law, then you must come and follow me if you want to inherit eternal life. And in order to follow me, you have to let go of everything, everything that has, uh, that has set you apart, that has distinguished you in the world, that you've held on to. You have to give that up and come follow me. So it's the law and the giving up of what we have to now follow Jesus. That's what gets us into what Bonhoeffer is calling true discipleship, full discipleship. Um, and so, it becomes a new commandment only because Christ binds his disciples to the law. His concern is not for a quote unquote better law than that of the Pharisees. It is one and the same. It is the law which must remain and be carried out in every letter until the end of the world, which must be fulfilled to the letter. His concern really is for a quote unquote better righteousness. Those who do not have this better righteousness will not either enter the kingdom of heaven. This will be because they have dispensed themselves from following Jesus and referred back to the law, who referred them back to the law. But no one is able to achieve this better righteousness except those addressed here, those called by Christ. Christ's call, Christ himself, is required for that better righteousness. So that's that, even though Bonhoeffer's not explicit, that's kind of that's the righteousness that exceeds that of the Pharisees. So it's not doing more of the law. It's the added thing of following Jesus that exceeds the Pharisees and the scribes, that exceeds their righteousness, because they're following the law. I mean, they're very righteous, very observant people, very religious folks. They're doing everything that they're told to do, and but they have yet one more thing. They have to go further, and that's the exceeding of the righteousness. That the You exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees, you exceed the law by now following Jesus. And again, it matches up with the rich young man. It matches up with as Jesus is going along. What are we supposed to do? In the gospel for today, how difficult it is for a rich person in the kingdom of heaven. And Peter's like, well, we've left everything for you. We don't have anything anymore. We've left it all for you. And Jesus goes on to say, that, you will inherit even more than you have had before, as we, ultimately as we build this community of faithful people, this community of disciples, and you'll gain more than you had before. Now, the issue really is, and I think it's the sticking point for many people, is that what you gain is not yours personally. So, like for instance, for Peter and Andrew and James and John, they had the fishing business. That's what they did. They were in it with their family. It was theirs, as it were. They would inherit the full thing once their parents died. So it was theirs. So they held it for themselves. What happens when you give up all of that? You give it up individually, but you gain it in terms of the community, and that's why it's really important, if we're going to live as Jesus is asking us, that we change the mindset of this kind of rugged individualism, capitalism. I must get mine, even though many of us are getting what we get to take care of the people around us, to help with family and friends, to give to the community. So it's not that we're hoarding it, as it were, but um, what we're ultimately being asked to do is let go of all of the individual stuff, so that when we come together as a community, we can pool what we have. Whether it's we bring, as we saw in the early church, see in the early church in Acts, sell what we have and bring it for the community, or bring what we have to the community and let it be divvied up, or whether it is that, okay, I have a little bit, and so I'm going to contribute, and I have a little bit, so I'm going to contribute, and then we manage it in such a way so that everybody gets what they need. So that there aren't people that have a whole bunch and people that have barely enough. We're distributing it in the community so that everybody has what they need. So that to borrow a more contemporary term, we're leveling the playing field, as it were, making sure that everybody, is cared for. And we see that, in the early church in the first part of Acts. Um, and so that's the better righteousness. That's what goes beyond the righteousness of the Pharisees. That now you have this sense of collective care for one another, such that if there such that really does make it true, when there is no slave or free, no male or female, no Jew or Gentile, but all are one, because all are seen as worthy of having enough, and the enough comes from the community. There are those that have more, so they're able to contribute uh, more, such that everybody has enough. So I think the fear for a lot of us is, well, if I give away what I have, I can't trust these people over here to share what they have, so that I'll have what I need. And that's a legitimate concern, because we haven't really figured out a way to do this in real time. I mean, in smaller situations, like in neighborhoods, and, many of us grew up in neighborhoods where, if you knew somebody was hungry, you had extra food, you would take it to them. Everybody knew that such and such was struggling for whatever reason. Okay, well, you get together and take what is needed, or the kids don't have the clothing that they need, so whether people get together and give it to them, so we have maybe small scale experience in this kind of community action and care for one another, and so that is the kind of righteousness, of better righteousness, so to speak, that Bonhoeffer talks about, that is really speaks to the community that is righteous beyond the law. Um, And so when Jesus says he's come to fulfill the old covenant, um, he shows that there's a unity between God's will in the Old Testament, so called, and in the law and the prophets, that it's all connected and it's fulfilled in Jesus. And so Jesus must come and do the work that he's given to do, ultimately to die, to now be raised again, in obedience to fulfill the law that God has already put in place. Paul talks about this in some ways in Romans, but that's a whole other conversation. And of course, on Bible study on Sundays, at some point we'll get to that, working through the authentic letters of Paul. But since Jesus says he's come to fulfill the law, then there is a continuity that runs through, from the very beginning now, to Jesus and on through, to eternity. And then Bonhoeffer does. Oh, okay, we've only got a couple of minutes. Bonhoeffer does something very interesting, and I think it continues to play out in humans, where we take, um, you know, the law, the Bible, the tradition, whatever you want to call it, and then we idolize that, to the point that it's, even though we wouldn't say that and probably don't think it, it's usurped the position of God. So now, the law or the Bible or, whatever particular practice or tradition we have now becomes more important, than even God. That the law has replaced God, and so idolizing the law, and legalizing God, were really the sins of the nation of Israel, that they had raised the law to something above God. Um, and Jesus is coming to bring that back into balance, but also to add on this new understanding of now, a better righteousness that comes from following Jesus. So there is no fulfillment of the law without communion with God, and there is also no communion with God without fulfillment of the law. So it's a both and. And the linchpin in there, the glue that holds that together, is Jesus. And so you can't have one without the other. That's why, excuse me, in some ways, you know, that's why we still study and read the Old Testament, even though it's difficult read, and even though the way it's written sometimes it really seems like God is really super vengeful and really, really, a terror, in the world if you don't follow, what God says, or if you happen to be an enemy of Israel, or whatever. But I think when we balance it with Jesus, or read it through the lens of Jesus, then we begin to see some of the things that, maybe, we would miss, if we were just reading it on its own. And so it's important, and again, as Bonhoeffer saying, we have to have both and. Um, because if we see that the fulfillment of the law is in Jesus, then that changes how we interpret some of the things that were written, in the Hebrew scriptures. So, that's going to have to be it for this week, unfortunately. Um, we'll, kind of wrap up, his discussion of Jesus' fulfillment of the law, um, and on next week, and then continue on into, this his discussion of what it means to be kindred, of the connection of how you deal with conflicts that are inevitable, between people, based on what Jesus says in Matthew 5, and how that, now applies, to the Christian community, but also to the wider community, to the larger community. So, excuse me. So it's 7:56. So, 4 minutes until the hour of 8 o'clock. Now, 3 minutes until the hour of 8 o'clock. So thank you all for coming and continuing our discussion. We'll begin again, or continue on next week, next Wednesday. And for those that are gathering for Compline will begin in now a little bit less than 3 minutes. And so thank you all for your time and your attention. And we look forward to being together in worship, in other times of prayer and study, and whenever and however our God ordains for us to be together. Have a wonderful night. Stay safe and well. And God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.